Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Pathways to Inclusive Higher Education in Colorado, co-sponsored by Peak Parent Center and IN. My name is Pam Christie. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the training, so please use the chat button at the bottom if you have any questions. And Shana will have an opportunity for Q&A as well. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You will be muted for most of the presentation, so please use chat to ask any questions. Closed captioning is available at the bottom of your screen, and unfortunately, no Spanish translation will be offered today. It was very short notice. I sent an email about that before the webinar. Our apologies. So it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Shana Lang from IN. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Pam. Hi, everybody. My name is Shana Lang. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for IN, Pathways to Inclusive Higher Education in Colorado. So we're a nonprofit that seeks to inform parents and educators and families with students with intellectual disabilities about the options to go to college and have an inclusive college experience. So we have an hour today where I'm going to chat through what our programs look like here in Colorado, and then really land on some ways that you can prepare, some skills that your students that you love or work with can start to develop and work on in order to be prepared for a successful transition to post-secondary education. So just a quick overview of who IN is. As I mentioned, we're a nonprofit and our focus is on helping universities and colleges across the state of Colorado develop inclusive programs for students with intellectual disabilities. And within these programs, we're looking at having students be able to develop academically, socially, vocationally, and in their independence. So we're looking at a holistic program model. I do like to point out that in ourselves, we are really the resourcer to families and educators. We do not provide the services on the college campuses. That is specific to the program staff at each institution. So they're all going to be a little bit nuanced in how they provide these services, but we love to give the overview and get you connected with the right one for you. So this is a small but powerful team of two, as I like to say, my executive director, Tracy Murphy, and myself. And we want you to know that we're available to you with questions. So please know that you can take our contact information down. I would love to help resource you and connect you as best as possible, especially as questions come up throughout our presentation today. I would love to help resource you with the specific questions or personalized questions that you might have. So here are our objectives. I've got three plans for us today. I want to first start with being able to differentiate the different levels of support that students with disabilities can receive at the college level. And then I'm going to hone in on the specific category of support that we call inclusive higher education and talk about what those programs offer. And then, as I mentioned, we'll address some readiness skills for students as they prepare for post-secondary education. So this is just a picture of how supports at the college level have evolved over time for students with disabilities. You'll see early on, those first 3 blocks of time was really when laws were being passed to be able to support students that were already enrolled in college, but needed things like accommodation. So that's where we see that 504 coming into place, lots of really essential laws that requires institutions of higher education to support the students that are enrolled that have disabilities. It wasn't until 2008 that we saw programs across the nation support students with intellectual disabilities. So this population of students that weren't able to be admitted to colleges traditionally, 2008 allowed a national movement for these programs to begin to open their doors to students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then we were slow to the draw, but 2016 is when Colorado jumped in on that movement. And it's when we launched our first inclusive higher education programs for students with ID. And then we've seen over 30 graduates since then from those programs. We're seeing 12 more this coming May. And we're just excited about the trajectory of what's happening specifically in Colorado for these particular students and these particular programs. So I tend to nerd out on that timeline a little bit. That's not always effective for a lot of people, but what it leads us to is breaking down what are those different levels of support that students with disabilities can receive. So that's where we're going to start with today. So those first few laws that I pointed out, they allow or they require that institutions of higher education provide disability services. So this is kind of a criteria that's helpful as you're thinking about the students in your life of which level of support are they going to fall into. So disability services are for students that do meet traditional college entry criteria. So they can get into the universities or colleges using a traditional diploma, GPA, taking ACT, SAT tests, all of those pieces. And they would be pursuing a degree, likely. They're going to be students that are pursuing an associate's degree or higher. And they can meet all of the outcomes of the classes that they're going to be taking. At the college level, that's called essential functions. When you get into a college class, they're going to have a list of what are the essential functions of this course that we're expecting all students to meet. But they can access accommodations. So they would go to a disability service office at any institution. It's a requirement by law that there's at least a person or an office of multiple people to support students that need additional accommodations. So they would have to self-disclose their disability, sit down through an interactive process with a counselor there to say what's going to be an appropriate accommodation at this level or in these classes. So you'll see a list of some common accommodations. Accommodations can't change the expectations of a class, but they change the way in which students can meet those expectations. So we're looking a lot at extra time on exams, quiet location. If they need that separate location for exams, they can have interpreters, assistive technology. So just different ways that students can interact with the course in order to reach the same expectations as any other student. So that is available, as I mentioned, at any institution. And then we have this middle ground level of service that I like to refer to as supplemental services. These are things that are not required by law, but some institutions have developed programs to offer some additional supports. These are still for students that meet the traditional college entry criteria and are able to meet the essential functions of their course. So they're going to also be degree seeking. They're going to have to meet those expectations. And so they're going to primarily be independent academically and just receiving accommodations, but maybe they need some more support with executive functioning and social engagement. So there are a few programs across the state that offer that on top of the disability services that are in place. But what I want to point out with these two categories are these are for students that do meet college entry criteria and are able to cognitively engage with all the expectations of their college courses, which is wonderful and really valuable. But we work with the population of students that traditionally have not been able to meet that. And so we oftentimes see what happens after K-12? Where do they want to go? How are they going to be developing the skills that so many students at the college level are developing? And that's where these inclusive higher education programs came in. So these offer an alternative route of admission. Students do not have to meet the traditional college entry criteria. So instead, they apply to an inclusive higher education program, proving need for additional support, and then they're enrolled to the institution through that alternative admission option. These are primarily for students with intellectual or developmental disabilities. A lot of the students that we work with are coming from severe support needs classrooms, have been in special education services their entire K-12 career, things like that. These students, because they are not a traditional entry criteria kind of student, they're not going to be pursuing an associate's degree or higher. Instead, they're going to be pursuing a certificate. This is to allow their college experience to meet their level. And the way that we do that is by offering these students both accommodations and modifications. So only students within inclusive higher education programming can access modifications at the college level. So with that, these programs offer support academically, socially, vocationally, and in their independence while helping the college content or the curriculum meet their cognitive level. So all of this is going to be in line with their job goal. It's really to prepare them for a future of independent living and adulthood. So those are the three levels of support, and I'm going to continue honing in on the inclusive services as we go along. So which of our universities or colleges across the state offer inclusive services for students with intellectual disabilities? Currently, we have these four. So we've got Elevate at Arapahoe Community College, which is in Littleton, Colorado. We have UCCS and their Office of Inclusive Services in the Springs. UNC and their office called Go On and Learn, or GOAL, in Greeley. And then Regis just started their program this past fall, and they're here in Denver. So you'll see kind of a difference across all of these programs of how long they are. We have at ACC a 3-year program, UCCS and UNC are 4-year programs, and then Regis offers a 1-year track or a 2-year track. So there's some differences amongst them, but they're all focused on the same goals of supporting students with intellectual disabilities. And then down at the bottom, you'll see a designation called CTP. That's Comprehensive Transition Post-Secondary Program Status. That means that all of these institutions have received that designation from the Department of Education, where they are saying that they are majority inclusive. So it's not a special education course on a college campus. These are inclusive courses, students going into college courses, going into college settings and having support there. And they're also holding these students to high standards and helping them develop progressively. And then there's also a component of that status that indicates they're really working with them to develop job readiness skills and job experiences. And so any student that enrolls in these 4 programs would be pursuing what we call a comprehensive higher education certificate. That certificate is accredited by the institution. It's not just a piece of paper calling it completion. They have transcripts, they have grades, they are pursuing something very intentional to their job goals and their future goals that's approved by the institution. And all of these schools have that, so it's transferable. Students are able to transfer from Elevate at ACC over to GOAL at UNC if they see fit. And we will be, actually next week, we're launching a grant program where more institutions of higher education can apply for inclusive higher education funding. And so we're going to see more programs pop up across the state in the next 2 years, hopefully offering diverse options for students with intellectual disabilities. So this is a picture of what these schools are all going after. How are they actually supporting students with intellectual disabilities on campus? So these are what we call the 4 pillars of inclusive programming. We have academics, social, career, and independence. And I'm going to spend some time talking about how they offer support in those categories. But just as a quick glance, what we talk about under the academic pillar is that students are fully integrated into classes. So they're taking 2 inclusive courses each semester. And these are courses that they select from the course catalog that any other student has access to. They're able to access those accommodations and modifications to help the content meet their cognitive level. They're pursuing that certificate, they're being held to high standards, and they're really growing academically. So I'll touch a bit more about what those modifications might look like at this level, but we've really seen students thrive as they experience that level of inclusion. And then at the social level, they are just like any other student as well. So they are fully engaged on campus. They have tons of natural support. So these programs are largely guided by what we call peer mentors. So those are hired neurotypical peers to work with students with intellectual disabilities and help them get acclimated to the college campus. So peer mentors will likely go with students to college classes if they need support, or to an event. Maybe there's a club they want to try out and they can ask a peer mentor to go with them in order to support them as needed. And then there's a big bulk of these programs that's focused on career development, which is true of any student going to college. They're going to college taking these courses in order to be prepared for a job goal. So we look at that pretty carefully at these programs where we want students to have a job progression. So they might come in and start with some career exploration, but by the time they're at their 2nd year or 3rd year, they're going to have on-campus job experiences, maybe internships, maybe off-campus internships or paid employment. So they're really working with a coordinator at their program to help them experience meaningful jobs on their campus and in their community so that they're prepared for that future employment. And then all the while, students are working on independence. So out of our 4 programs, 3 of the universities offer on-campus living. Arapahoe Community College is a commuter college, so there's no option for that. But UCCS, UNC, and Regis offer on-campus living, where students from these programs get to live in a typical dorm or apartment and receive support from the staff and the peer mentors as needed. But they're all, whether they're living on campus or not, receiving guidance and independent living skills. So they'll take 2 college courses each semester, and then they also have 1 direct instruction course. And that's really where these program staff are working with students on independent living skills, financial management, self-advocacy, self-determination, all of those essential skills that require just a bit more direct instruction. So this is what all of those programs are hitting at. As I mentioned, they're a little unique in how they do it, but this is what we see as the thrust of inclusive higher education programming. So I will speak to the academics, and Pam or anybody else, feel free to interrupt me as I go. I know I can get on a roll, but my hope is to just give you some more details behind those 4 pillars and then give you guys some time to ask me questions about the programming. But as I mentioned, students at this point with academics, they have access to the full course catalog. So they're not limited to only a few classes to choose from. We really want students to have choice. So when they come to this college class or this college campus, we want them to see all of the potential courses or majors that any other student would, and really work with a program staff to determine what's appropriate for their goal. What are skills that they're going to want to pursue? As I mentioned, they're going to be taking courses for credit, and they're graded. And those graded, even modified courses are going to be transferable across our 4 programs. And as they're pursuing that comprehensive higher education certificate, they get to select an area of study that's in line with what's offered at the institution. And what we love about this certificate is they can really piecemeal it together to meet their particular goal. So a lot of times, if we think about a liberal arts degree, you've got tons of gen eds that you have to hit, and then you get to choose some electives, and then you have these requirements, right? With the comprehensive higher education certificate, students get to sit down and have person-centered planning with their program staff to say, this is my career goal. What are the classes that can help me build some skills? So we've had a student that really wanted to focus on entrepreneurship. He had a photography business that he wanted to launch, but he felt really overwhelmed with the skill of photography, as well as managing clients and some of the financial aspects. So instead of doing just photography classes or just business classes, this certificate allowed him to do both. So he took photography courses, he took entrepreneurship courses, Excel courses, all the things that helped him build some confidence in those skills so that he could be more independent in that vocational goal. So as I mentioned, they're going to be taking 2 of those traditional college courses each semester, 1 specialized course from the program staff, and all is in line with their job goal. So this is a picture. I'm not sure how well you all can see it, but this is a glance at the Elevate at ACC certificate. So you'll see each semester is broken down there where they do have a general education of sort where they have found these courses are valuable to any student no matter what they do. Things like interpersonal communication, how to market your image. And then each semester they're choosing any course that they desire that's based on their vocational goal along the way. So this kind of gives a breakdown. We see students in these programs really only taking 2 to 3 courses each semester because of the load of these college courses and the challenge that they're experiencing academically. So this has been the best fit for our students, both in Colorado and nationally, that we see this is a good rhythm for them to be able to be fully invested in their courses. So some of the ways they receive support in this arena is there's going to be an academic coordinator at each institution that works with the students to determine modifications and accommodations. And then they're going to be the ones offering the modifications and accommodations. So traditionally at the college level, faculty are required to provide accommodations to make sure that students are able to meet the level of expectations in their course. With these programs, the faculty work very closely with program staff, and the program staff alter the assignments to meet the student need. So it's very much based on somebody who knows the student, knows their cognitive level, and can really work with them one-on-one. They're going to receive course advising along the way. They're not left to their own devices in that, but it's very self-determined. We want students to take courses that they're passionate about that will help them be successful. They're going to have a modification and an accommodation letter that they will self-advocate with to their professors, and they can receive support for that. And then they also have peer mentors that can help them before class to review, during class to help them understand, and after class to make sure that they were tracking with what was going on. So there's lots of peer mentor support around their academics. And then there's also often study halls or office hours with our program staff where they can come in and just get additional support. Maybe they don't understand an assignment, or maybe they're really working on a particular academic skill. They can come in and access that frequently throughout their week. And then what I love about these programs is these students are not just receiving support from their program staff, they're highly encouraged to go across the campus to use any resource that other students would. So the Writing Center and the Tutoring Center that all college students go to, these students go as well. They can have a peer mentor go with them to offer some support, but a lot of what we see at these campuses is a buy-in from the entire campus to say, we want to support this population of students, and we're going to figure out how to do that. So they do trainings with program staff to make sure that they're able to support students in those different arenas. So what are some of our students studying? We love that it's all across the board. They sometimes surprise me with what they decide to study. But we have tons of students pursuing graphic design at ACC. That's been a big one. Communications, just in general, early childhood has been a really common one. We've got some fun ones like performing arts and dance. We've even had students go the healthcare and human services route. And I'm going to talk to you about some of our outcomes, and it's really cool to see how that plays out. Sports management, exercise science. So really students get to say, this is my passion, and they get to work with someone to determine what would be a good job goal and what are the classes that are going to support you in that. So very similarly at the social level, students are able to receive support as needed. They can be independent as needed as well, but it's very much guided by peer mentors. There's going to be a campus engagement staff in each of these inclusive offices that helps students get connected to services on campus. Lots of clubs and events and things like that. A lot of our students at these programs are the most involved on their campus. They start their own clubs. They launch their own events because they really love being a part of their campus. So students are fully engaged and receive guidance as needed. And then with the career piece, as I mentioned, there's going to be a progression of career and job experience. So this is kind of a breakdown of a 4-year program, what we're looking at. So year one, it's a lot to take on for these students. So we look at them just acclimating to their college life and exploring some options. So they'll do interest surveys, maybe do some readiness skills, maybe work with the career services on campus, or job shadows, things like that. Year two, we're really looking at building those skills. So they could be doing continuous job shadows, but we're really looking for them to have some on-site experience where they're doing some internships, getting some engagement in any kind of capacity. A lot of our students start their first job like in the cafeteria at their institution alongside their neurotypical peers, just to get a gauge for what is general employment expectations. And then as we shift to their later years, year 3 and 4, we really want it to be focused in their area of interest. So maybe they're going to be doing internships in their area of interest on campus. So an example is a student who's really interested in working at a library. They went and interned at the library and was able to see a lot of different options that they would be able to pursue in their future. And then they can receive job coaching. So our peer mentors or our program staff can go with them to those internships or job experiences to offer on-site job support. And then the same is true for that 4th year, but we're really wanting, the ideal is for them to be in the community. So getting them off that college campus and kind of pushing them to transfer those job skills into the community in their area of interest. You will see noted on here that there's a connection with DVR. These programs work closely with DVR because we want there to be a seamless transition out of college for students, because they're going to continue to need those supports in the employment field. And so they work with DVR to be able to find some job options, but making sure that students are connected with their counselors so that that support can continue. And then on our independence piece, as I mentioned, students are going to engage in person-centered planning, self-advocacy support all along the way. Those that are not living on campus but are still participating in that direct instruction course, they're going to be able to receive life skills like how to plan outings, how to manage relationships, even public transit if that's something that they need support in. So it could be very individualized. And then you'll see the residential living options. So UNC has dorms on campus, UCCS has on-campus apartments, and then Regis also has a dorm that's available. What we're seeing right now for the independent living piece is students in these programs are living with peers from their program in that first year or two in the dorms or in the apartments. So they're not going to have neurotypical peers living in their direct apartment. That is mainly because they have so much peer mentorship coming into those apartments and checking in on them in those first few years. But if students have really shown growth in independent living and they feel equipped to transition out of that, they're able to live with neurotypical peers their third or fourth year on campus. And we've seen several students do that, which has been a really great fading of support. And then as you'll hear me say a million times, peer mentors are huge in that arena. They also these program staff work with the residential staff to train a traditional RA. So they have all access to any other staff member that other students would. They also partner very closely with their security teams because safety and security is a big question for the families that we work with. Very valid question. And so all of these programs offer orientation a little bit earlier than the rest of their campus so that these students and these parents can meet security on campus. They can know their faces. They know where to go if they need additional support. They have contact information for their peer mentors, things like that, where they feel more secure. And that has been really wonderful to see the campus take ownership of the safety and security of our students. And then you'll see a note down there that Medicaid and SLS waivers or even DD waivers can offer some support on college campuses. So I've recently done a webinar with somebody from the Medicaid system and the waiver system to share about how families can access Medicaid waivers even on the dorms or on campuses as they're walking between classes. So that's something that you can always braid support. You'll hear that a lot in our world, is that we don't want students just to come to inclusive higher education programs and not use those services that they're entitled to. And so if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to connect you with somebody to help explain that a bit more. But we've had several students have people come and take them to get groceries as a part of their waiver, or come and help them clean as a part of their waiver. So that's a really great option just to consider as we move forward. Okay, so let's talk outcomes. I think it's really important when I share with families with students with intellectual disabilities, I want to recognize that most of them didn't know this was an option. It wasn't until 2016 in our state. And so saving for a college fund for a student with ID maybe didn't seem reasonable at the time. And so we're working with lots of families that are not financially prepared for this outcome. And so I want to speak to what's the return of investment that you're going to receive. What is the actual meaningful outcomes that your students experience? And then afterwards, I'll hit on how are some ways that there are financial support to help you get there and help your student get there. So we see on that left side, this is from a national poll of what are we seeing from all of these programs? What are really the outcomes that we're seeing? And so we've noticed that there's 3 times students with IDD that have gone to college are 3 times more likely to have employment. And when we talk about employment, I don't just mean working at the grocery store that they could have worked at if they didn't go to college. We're talking about competitive integrated employment that's in an area of interest that they love, something that gets them excited. And so we've seen that number as well here in Colorado. We have about a little over 75% employment rate from our students that are graduating. And what I love too is that it's not just that employment that shows the outcomes and the development of these students. We're also seeing that they believe that they can continue to grow, that they believe that they have a part in their community, that they have more fulfilling futures and communities around them. So we also see students that are living independently after graduating from college, and their parents never thought that was possible, but they had the support in place to guide that, and now it's a potential in their future. And within that 3% more likely to be employed, we see just an increase in job diversity. So students that are working, as in a nutrition office at a hospital that they'd never thought was an option. They're experiencing increased wages because of those unique job options, and then ongoing social relationships and independence. So tangibly, some of the students that we've seen graduate, as I mentioned, we've had 32 graduates and 12 more are coming down the pike. This is Vince. You'll see on the screen. He's a student that I had the honor of working with at ACC. And when I asked him what it was like to go to college, he said, going to college is actually a really fun thing. It's like freedom. I've learned how to be independent. So that kind of response is hard to quantify, but these students are feeling confident and independent as they transition out of college. But just as a peek from some of our graduates, we have a student that studied social work and she went into the social work field back home and then just got hired as a full-time paraeducator in her community. We have a student that her dream was to be an administrative assistant. And so she is for the corporate level of ARC. Darius is a graphic designer. He's in Denver. Caitlin and Paige are full-time teacher assistants in their local districts. We've got students that are working in hospitals, as I mentioned, the nutrition department, people that are co-teaching. So Mia, she's co-teaching an ASL class at a local college. So just amazing things that we're seeing these students walk into with confidence, even with the certificate. So they're not walking out with a degree, but they're walking out with a certificate that shows the classes that they took that were strategic, and they can communicate and advocate the skills that they developed to be equipped for the job they're applying to. So we love that. Okay, real quick before I let you ask me all your questions, the application process, just as we're looking at this coming year, fall 2023. So applications are starting to wrap up here in the spring, actually. But for any students or families that are looking at this in the future, it's just very, very common for applications to open early winter. So we're looking December, January, and then closing here in March. And the process is a bit more interactive than a traditional college application. So there's not a fee for these online applications, but students and families would submit an online application to each institution that they're interested in, and specifically to each program that they're interested in. So as I mentioned, that's the way to kind of skirt the admissions criteria. So you go to the program page and submit their online application. And then what they're going to ask for in those applications is a basic student questionnaire to understand what the student's goals are, what the student's needs are, and to see if they're a good fit. Then they're going to ask for parent input as well to get a more robust picture of who the student is. They're going to ask for letters of recommendation from their teachers and other supporters. And then they're also going to ask for disability documentation. This oftentimes is sufficient as a most recent IEP or a transition IEP, as long as there's a diagnosis stated on there. But they don't just look at the diagnosis, they're looking holistically of what are the supports the student has received over their K-12 experience. What are things that we're going to need to continue providing to them at the higher education level as well. So they really do a deep dive into IEPs. It's not just something to check off the list. They want to see who the student is and what their needs have been. And then what I love about these programs is they offer an on-campus experience day or interview day. So that's if students are not going to be able to fully express themselves in an online application, but they can come and meet with the program staff and say, this is why I want to go to college. These are the skills I want to develop. They can come and do that. They often also have parent interviews, and then students get to shadow a day in the life. So going to a college class, going to an event, going to a club meeting, things like that, to see if it's something they're really wanting to pursue. So for our 4 programs, these are the dates. UCCS has closed their application for the fall, but they are doing a really wonderful Summer Institute, which is a full-blown on-campus experience for a week where students get to go to classes, get to learn some self-determination skills. So they're a really wonderful institution to still get engaged with, even if applying isn't an option at this point. And then our other schools are really wrapping up here soon. So ACC is closing their application the end of March on the 27th in particular. Regis is going to go until about April. And then UNC gave a little bit longer until May. So we have an ongoing link on our website that provides the information for these programs. And so you're always welcome to jump on that, reach out to me, and I can connect you with program staff as needed. So quickly, financial information. So students, as they're taking these courses, they're going to pay the same cost per credit hour as any other student because they're fully engaged in those classes. They're taking up space because they deserve to, so they're going to pay that cost. They're going to be engaging with the faculty members as any other student would. So they pay the same cost per credit hour, but they take far fewer credit hours. We're looking at between 6 to 9 credit hours per semester versus the 18 credit hours that most college students are taking. So that tuition cost, therefore, will be lower just because they're taking fewer credits. On top of that is a program fee. That's to support all of the services they're receiving from peer mentors, employment coordinators, academic coordinators. And that's different across each school. At the community college level, we're seeing like $1,500 for an annual program fee. Up at the Regis level, which is a private university, it's closer to 10,000 annually. So there's a big discrepancy there. But there's lots of support from those program staff to get families connected to scholarships and some resources accordingly. And then if students are living on campus, they pay the same room and board as any other student would. So I encourage families. I have a financial handout that can give you some clickable links to go check out, but we really encourage you to look at each program directly and see what their costs are for the coming year. So some of the resources that can help chip away at those costs would be financial aid. So as I mentioned, all of those schools have what we call CTP status. So that means that anybody enrolled in those programs can complete a FAFSA form where they can have access to federal grants or federal work study funds. Because they're receiving a modified certificate or outcome, they don't have access to federal loans. So there are some other ways to help cut away at that cost. So there are tons of scholarships at the national level, but also at the school or program level. So our program staff have really worked to gain scholarships from local agencies and the levy funds, things like that. So it's always worth asking. I think College is a great website that has an ongoing list of national scholarships for students pursuing these particular programs. We encourage families to look into ABLE accounts, which is a savings account for students or for individuals with disabilities. That funding can go to inclusive higher education that you save over time, but it can go to a variety of things for the individual with disability. So that has been a really common savings account for our families because they don't see as much restriction to how they use those funds. And then DVR, if students are working one-on-one with a DVR counselor, they'll be able to say, this is my job goal, this is why I want to go to college, and DVR can help pay for tuition costs. They do not pay the program fee directly. They're only going to pay for the courses or some of the educational needs that the student has. CCBs or community-centered boards could offer some scholarships. We work with some each semester to offer scholarships to students in their catchment area. And then we also just encourage students to have some kind of contribution. So if they're working on campus, to put away $5 a month towards their degree, just as a way to continuously invest in that process. So I talked your ears off. I know I still want to be able to get into what skills I think are important for the development of this, but do you guys have any questions just about what these programs are looking like, how they support our students?
You can unmute yourself or put it in the chat. There hasn't been anything in the chat as of yet. So here's one question. Our daughter is currently enrolled at CMU in Grand Junction. We are trying our best to create our own program with the disabilities director and Medicaid waiver services. Are these consultants or trainers? Are there consultants or trainers that can help a new school create a program?
Yes. Great question, Stephanie. I see that in the chat. So our nonprofit, really, that's our role, is to help programs figure out a good model. And in particular, with our grant coming up, there's some funding available, which tends to help universities say, okay, I can get on board if funding is going to come down the pike. So Stephanie, I would love for you to reach out to me and I'd be happy to set up a meeting with the people that you've been chatting with at CMU. Yeah, we'd love to give them some resources and support.
Thank you.
Great question.
You don't have any other questions at this time.
All right, I'll keep rolling. I love it. Okay, so as you guys are thinking about inclusive higher education for your students with intellectual disabilities, or really any student with disabilities, this is just a great time to start talking about skills to develop to set them up for success. So what I love to do when I'm talking with educators or with parents is to talk about what's the purpose of preparing these students with these kinds of skills. I see lots of times I go to resource fairs and my banner says higher education, and there's lots of families that bypass me because they don't think it's possible for their student. And even if a student doesn't continue on to higher education, I still think the skills that we oftentimes teach any neurotypical peer about college readiness is going to help them in their future no matter what. So on the side, you'll see I focus a lot on that even if mentality. Even if a student doesn't want to pursue college or inclusive higher education, there is value to helping them navigate their passions, their goals, executive functioning, things like that. So these skills are still beneficial. And we also want to give an informed choice to our students, specifically for students with ID. A lot of times they're not told about college as an option because there's a belief that maybe they wouldn't be able to do it. But we want to give them the option to say, hey, I want to try that. That's going to be hard, but I want to try that. Even if there's modifications in place to help me, but I want to give that a go. And so we want students to make that informed choice and families to make that informed choice rather than withholding information from them. And that really just speaks to a normative pathway. As I mentioned, students in high school are getting prepped. Students as early as elementary school are getting prepped for what do you want to do in your future? Where do you want to go to college? And we want this population of students to be a part of that as well. And all of the skills that we talk about today and that you'll hear about in post-secondary readiness are transferable to if they have a job. Those are going to be skills that they can incorporate there. And we've just seen anecdotally, and there's research supporting it, that high expectations for our students lead to positive transition outcomes. So when we say, I believe that you can grow progressively and hold high expectations for our students, their transition goals for themselves and therefore their outcomes are going to be much better. So this is one of our graduate parents who also works for a CCB in the spring. She says the bar has been set high and the students have risen and reached it. They've been presumed competent and their lives have been changed. And her student is the one on the far right, who is now working at UNC, where he graduated from, living independently with a roommate and loving his life, as he tells us many times. So how can we start to begin this conversation of college preparation? A big thing is just presuming competence. We want to not assume what students can't do, but presume competence. That is a perspective that we have. It also affects our language to them, things like that. That's been a really big game changer for lots of families that we work with. Let's start there. And if they have need, we can support them accordingly. We encourage lots of families to participate in mentorship opportunities. So IN offers mentorship programs each semester for high school students with intellectual disabilities that say, I'm interested in this, but I don't know what it means. So they can meet with students that are currently enrolled in inclusive higher education and get a gauge for what life is like for them. And that has been really wonderful. So if you're ever interested in that, our website is going to have info on that, or you can always reach out to me directly. I encourage students to take field trips, go to college campuses, especially community colleges. So all community colleges are open access, meaning that there's not a requirement academically to be admitted. So a student, even with a non-traditional diploma, would be able to be admitted to a community college. So we just encourage students to go there, see what it would look like, just get some desire in them to be in that environment and to be continuously learning. We encourage interactive conversations with an IEP team. I have lots of families that say, okay, well, what's my next step, Shayna? What do we do? That's a great question. I wish I had, the best next steps, but really it's gathering the IEP team and saying, hey, we want to hold our student to high standards and we think he wants to go to or she wants to go to college. Let's talk about how we're holding high standards in her classes now. Let's talk about how we're helping them develop these skills. Let's get resources in. And so it's ongoing conversations with your IEP team to keep those expectations high. I encourage families to advocate, and I know Peak is huge with this too, advocate for majority of time in inclusive settings. It is mutually beneficial. What I've seen at the college level, we've had faculty that said, hey, I'm really concerned about students with ID being in my class. I'm concerned that they're going to cause disruption. That was the assumption. And now I've gone back to that same faculty and she said, they didn't cause disruption, they caused depth. There was a depth to the conversation and the discussion in their classes because inclusion is beneficial. It's messy and imperfect, but it's beneficial. And so as much as you can advocate for that, we really encourage that. And then I often encourage access to college readiness resources as just like general reading material, which may not sound very exciting, but there's some good links there. So thinkcollege.net, I mentioned that before. That's the national organization for inclusive higher education. They have so many resources for students and families and educators. Great place to kind of putz around. Goingtocollege.org has lots of great activities for students to complete to think about their futures. And then onetonline.org, that is a place for them to type in a general interest, career interest, and then see all of the options of various jobs and look at what's required, what are the skills. And so those are some really great spaces for students just to be as they're reading, as they're practicing any of those general academic skills, to hone it in towards those college readiness links that can really help them start thinking more critically about their future. So beyond just some of those general recommendations, we are seeing when students are coming to these inclusive higher education programs, we really want them to still be engaging in academics, even with modifications to meet their level, which can really range. So we see some students, if they're in a communication class and their peers are writing a 5-page paper, and that's not something that they're able to do in that season, they can be writing a paragraph or really focusing on a strong paragraph. We also have some students that are using graphic organizers to show what they've learned if written form is not going to be a good fit. So even for students with that level of modification, we still encourage them to be engaging in academic skill development. So what we encourage is just this basic writing. Sentence and paragraph structure is so helpful, not just at the academic level, but also in employment. Thinking through if they ever need to send an email to their employer, are they going to know how to structure that? And then also note-taking is going to be really beneficial for them. There's tons of avenues for students to receive note-taking support. Peer mentors can do it for them. There's tons of assistive technology, but there's something about them developing that engagement piece if they're able. When I'm listening to something, how am I jotting down notes to come back to at a later time? So those are great basic writing skills to continue working on. Reading comprehension techniques are beneficial no matter where they land. So using assistive technology or audiobooks is really wonderful early on. And then helping them do the same thing as note-taking in a class, which is annotation as they're reading. How do they highlight something or draw attention to something that helps them remember what their content is? And then we encourage them to have a knowledge of their learning styles and preferences, letting them know what their strengths and their weaknesses are. This is going to be great for advocacy at the college level and great for employment, where they can say, hey, this is something I really need support in, or this is something I'm really independent in. And then just pursuing their academic interests, asking them, what do you want to learn more about, is a great way to start. And then there's far more of these non-academic skills that we tend to see being focused on with career or college readiness. So you'll see these images on the side that you saw on the previous slide as well. Those are pulled from a Think College resource where they have this whole chart of all of these skills that they encourage students to be developing in. So we see communication, anticipating needs, interpersonal skills, maintaining curiosity, lots of things. These are just great skills to refer to over the K-12 experience. But when we really hone in on what are the essential non-academic skills that we've seen necessary for students in our programs, a big one is self-awareness. So at the college level, students are the ones advocating for themselves. So it's important for them to understand their particular disability and their strengths and be able to communicate that and discuss that with program staff, maybe with faculty as needed. And again, that's preparing them for employment. How can they do that appropriately in the employment field? And then really helping them define their career interest, something that they're passionate about, but that is also a tangible goal. So really great things to look into. Self-advocacy and decision-making is big. So offering choices consistently throughout the day is really wonderful for students in high school, because when they get to college, they're going to have lots of open space, lots of options that they choose how to use their time. And it can be a stark contrast to what their high school classroom was looking like. So as much as you can incorporate choice and option and some free space in their schedule, it's going to set them up for success to use that time wisely at the college level. Self-management, such as schedule and personal regulation, is really big. So these programs do not have 24/7 care. That could be coordinated and weaved with services as needed, but the program staff and the peer mentors are not going to be with them all the time. So students are going to have to develop some skills of how to get to their class on time, using a calendar app, using reminders on their phone, and program staff will help them with that. But we see so much development if they're able to start those skills and figure out what works for them earlier on. And then some personal regulation. So we'll see some students that maybe are not ready yet for inclusive higher education are those that have more behavioral concerns and aren't able to regulate personally. We have tons of students that we know moments happen and there are supports on campus for that. But by and large, we really want students to be able to say, this is an environment that might cause anxiety or cause this response. What are some coping mechanisms I can bring with me into that proactively? And those are really big things for them to be focusing on. And lastly, you'll see self-determination, just helping them identify goals and then planning for them. So we oftentimes can see students with these big goals, but don't know those small steps to get there. Or on the flip side, really small goals, and we know that they can reach something higher. So helping them navigate that goal setting and planning go together, coordinating some of those steps along the way. And all of these things are addressed in inclusive higher education. We don't expect students to have these down pat before they apply to these programs. I know I didn't when I went to college. So it's just good to have this on the forefront of your mind, to present this to your IEP team, things like that, as you prepare. So some of our last minute reminders for families as they're at home, some ways to start engaging this choice, this independence, these skills, is to help students wake up to an alarm, allow some independence, allow some natural consequences for those things, help them cook staple meals, have them pack their own backpacks or lunches, practice using public transportation. These are things that are just helpful for them to start on so that it doesn't feel like this wave of newness that they have to navigate after K-12. And this is a link, a great person-centered planning page that I've used with several students, just where we're helping them identify their goals and giving them a voice in this process. So we encourage families and educators to consistently ask students about what they want to do after K-12. Do they want to go to college? Let's address that conversation. Have them lead their IEP and their goal writing. Have them focus on strength-based assessments so that they know this is what my strengths are and I'm going to go in that direction. And then really offering choice. So at the K-12 level, allowing them to choose which electives they're taking or social groups they're a part of, and really allowing that self-determination to take place early on. So these are a list of links and resources for you guys. We have a few web pages on IN's website focused on students and educators and parents. We also have a Spanish website for those of you that would require that. We have ongoing webinars each semester that we focus on what are these programs doing, what are the outcomes, and how can families prepare. So this will be, I believe Pam's going to send this out to you all, but my contact again is at the bottom if you guys want to reach out directly. But we have a couple minutes. I feel like I talked your ears off, but we have a couple minutes for you guys to ask any personalized questions as they come, if you need.
Stephanie asked, how will the recording be available? Will it be emailed? So the recording, if all goes well, cross our fingers, it will be, I haven't had the best luck lately, I'll be honest. It will be on Peak's website by next week under recorded webinars. After this session, I will be sending the PowerPoint to everyone, and that will be emailed from the registration system, Salesforce. Great question, thank you. Did you want to talk about your survey? Because
yeah, sure.
Shana, okay.
Yes. I'll pop this link in our chat if that's okay with everybody. It's a super brief survey. I would just love to hear from you on if this information was helpful for you and if there's anything else you need. That'll also give me your contact information and I can send you more links based on what we chatted about in here. So that's just a great way to get us connected.
Thank you, Shana.
Absolutely.
And you will be receiving an evaluation from Peak after this presentation, and we appreciate if you would just take a minute to complete that and provide your feedback, as we're always striving to improve our services here at Peak. If you have other questions, I know Shana has her contact information, maybe put it in the chat too, Shayna.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
you don't mind. But if you have other questions, please contact any parent advisor at Peak Parent Center, www.peakparent.org, 719-531-9400, or parent advisor at peakparent.org. Please check our website to register for our annual inclusion conference in Denver, April 17th through 18th.